welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into some really tough questions about the language we see all around us, and we're going to use some timeless wisdom to help make sense of it all. All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to look at Einstein's views on our time, then his own fight against racism. After that, we'll dive into some modern case studies of divisive rhetoric. Then we'll imagine Einstein's reply, talk about why being precise matters, and wrap up with a powerful message. Silence is not an option. It's going to be a fascinating journey. All right, let's kick things off by setting the stage. Let's start with a thought experiment, a really powerful one. What if Albert Einstein, one of the greatest minds in history, could hear the political rhetoric of today? What would he think? How would he react to the kind of language that's used to devalue people just based on where they come from? Now, before we jump in, I want to be super clear about something. This is a fictional setup, right? We're imagining a conversation. But, and this is the important part, every single quote you're about to see is real. They're all documented, authentic words. We're not making anything up. We're just putting these ideas side by side to see what happens. Okay, on to section 2. So you might be asking, why Einstein? Well, let's dig into why his voice is so incredibly relevant here. So, picture this. It's 1946. Einstein is speaking at Lincoln University, a historically Black institution, and he doesn't pull any punches. He looks at segregation and says it is, quote, a disease of white people. Think about how powerful that is. He's not blaming the victims, he's pointing directly at the source of the problem. And he didn't just stop there. Right after calling it a disease, he made a promise. He said, quote, I do not intend to be quiet about it. For Einstein, it was simple. You see something wrong, you have to speak up. Being silent was just not an option for him. He explored these ideas even further in an essay called The Negro Question. He pointed out that the American ideal of equality often seemed to apply only to, in his words, men of white skins. He also talked about this really insightful but painful idea that the terrible conditions people were forced to live in were then cynically used as proof that they were somehow inferior. And he made it crystal clear, if you consider yourself a person of goodwill, you can't just stand by. The only way to avoid being part of the problem, to avoid complicity, is to take action, through both word and deed. So, what's the core message here? It's that democracy isn't just a piece of paper, a constitution locked away somewhere. No. For Einstein, democracy is something we do. It's about how we treat each other every single day. It's the daily practice of recognizing the equal dignity in every single person. Okay, let's move on to section 3. Now that we have Einstein's principles as our foundation, let's look at some modern examples. And just to be clear, the point here isn't shock value. It's to really understand the mechanics of how this kind of language works. All right, our first case study. This is from 2015. It's a statement made about people migrating from Mexico. This is a classic example of exclusionary rhetoric. So what does that actually mean? Well, it's a specific rhetorical trick called collective blame. You take the alleged crimes of a few people and you paint an entire group with that same brush. It completely erases their individuality, right? They're no longer doctors or parents or workers, they're just criminals. And by dehumanizing a whole group like that, it makes it much easier to justify treating them badly and turning them into a scapegoat. Okay, case study number 2. This one's from 2019, and it was aimed at US-born members of Congress, all of whom were women of color. This is a different tactic, but it's just as destructive. It's called ethnic othering. The mechanism here is to deny someone's citizenship, their very sense of belonging, based purely on their ethnicity. It implies that no matter what your passport says, you're not really from here. This is a direct assault on the whole idea of a democracy where your rights are based on citizenship, not on your background. It's a classic pattern in racist rhetoric. And for our last case study, let's go back to Charlottesville in 2017. You probably remember it. A white nationalist rally where people were marching with torches, chanting neo-Nazi slogans. The response to this event was this statement. This rhetorical move is called false equivalence, and it's incredibly dangerous. Why? Because it takes a movement based on racial hatred, something that's fundamentally anti-democratic and anti-human, and it frames it as just one side of a legitimate debate. When you do that, you're not being neutral. You're actually normalizing extremism. You're shifting the boundaries of what's considered acceptable to talk about in public. All right, section 4, Einstein's reply. So we've seen the tactics, we've broken down how they work. Now, let's bring Einstein back into the conversation. How do his principles stand up against this kind of rhetoric?
Okay, let's put it all side by side. On one side, you have the tactic of dehumanizing groups. What's Einstein's principle? That the ideal of equality can't be limited by skin color. It has to apply to everyone, period. Then you have the tactic of telling citizens to go back. Einstein's reply? We can't stay quiet about that stuff. If we do, we become complicit. And finally, you have the tactic of equating neo-Nazis with protesters. Einstein's counter? We have to actively fight the prejudices we've absorbed from our culture. You see the pattern, right? One side is all about division, about creating an us and a them. Einstein's principles are about building a universal we. It's a total clash of worldviews.
We're almost at the end. Section 5 is about precision as a weapon, and this is a really important point about how we engage in these debates effectively.
So, you've probably seen this quote everywhere. It is easier to smash an atom than a prejudice. It sounds like something Einstein would say, right? But here's the thing. We can't actually find a verified primary source for it. And this brings up a crucial point. When we're fighting back against disinformation and hateful propaganda, our own accuracy is our best weapon. Our credibility is everything. If we use unverified quotes, even with the best intentions, we weaken our own arguments. We have to be precise.
Okay, so let's bring it all home. Section 6, silence is not an option. What's the big takeaway from all of this? What does it all mean for us today?
Here's the bottom line. The lesson from Einstein and from this whole exercise is that racism isn't just someone's opinion. It is a direct attack on the very foundations of a democracy: equal rights, equal dignity, and equal participation. And when democracy itself is under attack, being silent isn't a neutral position. To be silent is to let the problem grow.
So, what can we do? Remember Einstein's call to act by word and deed? Well, here are some practical steps. First, speak up. When you hear prejudice, challenge it. Second, act in solidarity. Stand with the people who are being targeted. Third, support those affected. Fourth, practice good media literacy. Question what you see and share. And fifth, share what you've learned. Education is a powerful tool.
And so we end right back where we started, with a question for you. Albert Einstein made his choice. He chose not to be quiet. So the challenge he leaves behind for all of us is this: what is your answer? In the face of prejudice today, what will your words and what will your deeds be? Thanks for joining this explainer.